Good afternoon, everybody. So it's about reactive monitoring, but I think we all know that reactive monitoring isn't really a thing, right? But before we get into that, bio slide. Never know what to put on this. In proper company disclosure, it's company colors. I work at Dime. I'm a data guy there. I say data guy because we all have such amalgamous things that we do to try to describe it in like a single abstraction is really awkward. In a sense of proper disclosure, I do work for Jason, so if this talk is horrible, please lie to him. I'd really appreciate it. So, I don't know about you, but I've never been in a situation where I was staring at a monitor trying to figure out what was going on like I was reading the entrails of a sacrifice. We all know that's not true. Everyone in this room has had that happen, and the first thing you need to do to fix it is just to admit that that's what goes on. Now, the way we find ourselves in this position is usually about the evolution of our company, the evolution of ourselves, and how things grew into this thing that we now operate and try to contain. So the best way to start to think about how we got here is to go through like a quick practice of classification. So there's like some generic things that we can all like bucket about our workloads and the company and all those kind of things to help us frame ways that we can improve. And there's a little bit of humor just to dull some like the pain. So, the first skill that we'll talk about is how much money is laying around for us to spend on things. Are we a very well-funded venture company that has lots of money to spend on all the fancy new solutions? Or is it more like an Oliver Twist model that when you get a new employee, that new employee then goes and signs up for Twitter and starts tweeting at Dropbox to get your company's Dropbox account bigger, and you're like running your architecture on a whole bunch of micro instances that were provisioned by each new employee? Because that matters, right? And then the next kind of question is like, what are you doing? Are you doing something that has these like extreme requirements that don't really exist in the world? In other words, can I go out and Google plugins for like Collecti and Nagios to solve all my problems? Or am I doing something that is kind of expansive and requires me to think about monitoring or looking at what my business systems are doing in a new way? Now this is an important one, and this requires deep knowledge of your team. It's like the neckbeard to hand waver. Now, don't get me wrong. Some neckbeards are awesome, because they'll refuse to use subpar things, right? They'll be like, no, that thing is crap, I'm gonna write a way better one. And then you have other people that are like, oh no, please, come solve it. I would love to purchase a solution. And knowing this about you and your team, and being able to confront them and their skill set is really important. So you can kind of go like a little bit of transparency on this one. The next one is time. So, how much time do you really have? What do your deadlines look like? Is the project manager standing behind you ready to beat you if you miss a deliverable? And now this is the one that kind of strikes home for me. So we run a lot of really old FreeBSD, and I don't know if any of you, yeah, there we go. Get it up. If you feel that pain, you feel that pain. Now, the other way you can kind of look at this, so I got corrected on the pyramids thing. People are like, the pyramids are lame, man. There's no computers in those pyramids. So just put PDP in there. Okay, fine. So there's a little modification. But this is important because when people are talking about different instrumentation for the cloud, some of us don't even get to do that. We have to like retrofit things to fit into old packages because we can't get the hours invested in the products that we need to like bring them up to modern standards. So again, these are all challenges that you'll confront and will shape the future problems that you end up running into. So, reactive monitoring. What it is and why it isn't really a thing. So, when I say this, it's basically like going back in time series, and the first thing that comes to mind is Peabody and Sherman, like going back in time and like trying to figure out what was going on. And when you do this, the first thing that always comes up is cost, right? Cream. Cash rules everything around me. Maximize shareholder value. That is our job, people. So when we start thinking about these problems, we need to think about the costs. And not just the cost of buying new systems, but the cost of man hours. I wanted to use one of these really cool charts because I'm using PowerPoint. And PowerPoint is vastly better than Keynote because it has these really cool charts with arrows. So essentially it all kind of boils down to something's broken. Is somebody aware that something's broken? How long has it been broken? And how mad are they going to get? And are their customers impacted to the point where they're walking out the door right now? So whenever I start to think about these things, there's like this really clever backhanded move that you can make where you try to craft it into a very clever mathematical statement. So when you put it on a slide, you can walk into a meeting with managers and project people and you can be like, science. right? Science. So I started describing this scenario the other day, and luckily my deskmate Dan, who's a super smart guy, walks over to the whiteboard, he draws an X and a Y axis. Like, Chris, this is so simple, man. The probability that an incident is going to cause you to lose customers is when the incident starts, right? It's 0. So if there's no incident, there's no chance you're going to lose customers. And the longer it goes on, you know, the higher chance they're going to leave. Now, there's a bunch of assumptions in here that they'll always leave, and there's kind of like the need for a severity axis that's going off in a different direction. The point is just to kind of start to frame this timeline so you can think about how different tools help you identify different states of problem resolution. So when we start to think about this, the most dangerous thing that can happen is when the customer is impacted before you're readily aware of it, because that means that your monitoring is, you know, essentially horribly failed. Then after you do that, how have you fully identified what the problem is? Then there's like this weird period like in between where you're trying to figure out, okay, I've roughly diagnosed what the problem is. Maybe I've put a shim in, but it's not fully solved. And clarifying that those are different points in the cycle helps you clarify to product teams and everybody else that investment doesn't stop even though the hurt has stopped. Now, we break these up into like other metrics because metrics, again, are a way to quantify incidents, and the only way to show that you've improved something or that an investment in a system or a piece of monitoring has improved is to then have another metric which tracks the success of the thing which is tracking metrics. Metrics all the way down. So, I mean, you can talk about a lot of these things. The end goal is always to get this resolve thing back into the CI stage. So you never want this problem to ever happen. And the only way to do that is to have a proper QA, proper testing, and all that kind of fun stuff. You never want it to happen, so you want to get it on the other side of the axis. This is the dream. This is what we all hope for. This is the slide you show that you want to manifest in the future, but you realistically know it's never going to happen because we're humans, we're fallible, and we always make things to break. So I started talking about this like time to identify thing and why it's really important. And again, the first part is just realize there's an issue, which is a whole container we'll get into. Then once you get to that point where you've realized that something has gone wrong, you go through like the human exercise of, okay, what is my individual decision-making process for boiling down how I'm going to get to a resolution? And a lot of that usually involves going through a collection of systems and collecting inferences, and the better your systems are and the better your dashboards are, the less number of these steps you actually follow. And this is kind of like your classic, I think it's Henry Winslow Taylor, like the time motion study where he was watching people move pig iron. So you kind of do that for us, and it makes you feel like all industrial and cool, because you can think like, yeah, you know, I'm doing things that are relevant and that have, you know, sense in time. But again, we have to go back to this number one thing. So this talk is really a collection, a pair of stories, I should say, about how these problems arose and how they bit us, and how I would like that to not happen to anyone else. So the worst case scenario is that your customer is impacted an issue before you realize that it exists. There's a constant race going on. Your customers are trying to make sure that you're working. That's why they're monitoring your service. And you're trying to make sure that you're doing your job. And if they ever win, you've lost horribly. So again, this kind of there's like a rehash to step back and say, okay, the quality of our tools can kind of be assessed in the number of steps it takes for you to understand what the problem is and get to some form of resolution. And now we're going to kind of walk through one of these scenarios. All right, you're sleeping. All of a sudden, phone blows up, API is unavailable. And the worst part of this is that a customer has called and reported the API is unavailable. Start the clock. You don't know really when this started, right? Because the customer called you. So the first thing you then need to do is go back and try to figure out when it started. Failure number one. Now, you can do this in like a collection of different ways. I mean, everybody has, based on their monitoring and what data is available, different methods for trying to solve this problem. And you'd like to think that you can always follow a fixed procedure. But humans have these things called biases, which really kind of destroy this. Now, even though you've got like a fixed regimented pattern, there's always things which will disrupt you. And that's where we get into the complexity side of things, because if there wasn't any complexity, this would be a boring story about how we fix something that broke. So when you're problem solving under pressure and you need to get an answer to someone, there's more pressure to think that you know something, right? So when your boss is coming back and saying, hey, what's going on with the API? And you're like, oh, I don't know, I'm checking some things, and he comes back a few minutes later, even if you don't have a good idea, chances are you'll surface an idea, and the second that idea is introduced, you'll want to create, it will filter your perception and your ability to think about how it's other things. Now, we all know this, you know, like there's that guy, Richard Hoyer, who used to work for the CIA, he open sourced this really awesome book about like how humans are just totally broken. And you end up going through like this kind of problem solving thing, right? Like you're Tim, you're running all over the house. Even though you know there's a set of steps that you should follow, sometimes you just kind of panic and you're like, I think it's this other thing. Well, this especially happens when all of a sudden you've introduced something new to your architecture. So we made a really smart decision and we introduced basically the top of the line database monitoring software. So all of a sudden we had this phenomenal insight into what's going on in the database. So when this problem arose, the first thing that we did was we consulted this new software because it was brand new, it was in there and had all this great insight. Well, of course, humans being humans, when something new enters your system, there's like this weird feeling like that outside thing just broke stuff. And because your stuff was fine before this new thing was here, what's going on? So it's like the whole endogenous versus exogenous thing. So like it's nothing outside the system, it's this new thing that I put into the system. That caused the whole thing. So you get like this huge debate about what caused it, and this is humans bickering because there's no proof that it actually did anything, right? This is all human problem, and the time is still ticking. So, just a quick shout out to the wonderful people of Vivid Cortex because that's the tool that was here helping us. So we get into the tool, and guess what? The problems are clearly highlighted. We can see them. They're right there. Game over, right? Stop the clock. You just won. This is like the biggest success you've ever had for anything implemented because you can go back in those metrics about how fast your metrics were helping you collect other metrics. Now has a metric showing you how much faster it was. Stop the clock. You just won. Or did you? Right? So because you just had this new database monitoring software and it's so new, you now had information about problems in your system that existed that you weren't aware of. And now that you're aware of them and you fix them, you think you've solved the customer's problem. No, right? So, and of course, meanwhile, this is retrospect. At that time period, we're taking these behaviors that we saw in the database and we're recreating them to show that we can cause the incident to occur again, increasing our confidence that we've just solved the problem. And then guess what? Bam, it's back. So we solved a problem, but not the customer's problem. And this is a collection of it's a collection of monitoring failures, and then we introduced a new thing to the system, and we didn't go through all the problems it identified right away. We were kind of like, it's really awesome, and we can get some great insight out of it. And it just happened to correlate with another customer problem arising at the same time, which is kind of unfortunate, but also fortunate in the sense that now when these things happen, we're more aware of them. So, reactive monitoring is a problem because humans aren't good at thinking about things that they didn't think about. Essentially, that's the problem, right? So all of a sudden something breaks and you're going to grasp for any straw that you can find to place causality into it. And when you're going back in time series, you're depending on how well your infrastructure is structured and how well you have information made available to your ops team, you're going to create any fantasy that you need to think that you've just solved this thing because it's late at night and you want to get back to bed. So if you can prove that it happened in the lab and then you can prove that your fix mitigates it, you're done and you think you've stopped the clock, but you haven't. So that's like the big like overall monitoring part. Now this part gets in a little bit of DNS wonkery, and I apologize in advance. When you work in the DNS for a while, you get like this weird passionate love for it, and you want to like get everybody really excited about DNS. So I'm sorry, it's just the way things work. So around Christmas, we all know the internet gets really busy, right? People are shopping. So we're used to this, we see like a seasonal load increase around the holidays, and we just landed another big customer. So we had these expectations of new load. And we predicted what they were, but models are always wrong, blah, 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 blah. But everything's quiet, and it's nice. There's no pages, everything's green. Just relax, man, it's Christmas. Have some cookies. But then you realize there's like a momentum issue here, right? So all of a sudden, you have more and more traffic on day one, then again the next day, then again the next day. But it's up and to the right. And the screens over on the business side of the house, they're ecstatic. Look at what you're doing. Green, 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 it's Christmas. Yeah. All the who's down in Whoville. So, you always need a guy in your organization who's like super pessimistic and thinks everything is broken, and when everything's happy, everything is horrible. Now, normally this has some other neuroses that are associated with it, like the decrease your lifespan. But you need to go exploring because things can't be that good. So again, we take the values off the y-axis. I know a lot of people do that, and when I'm in the crowd and I see that, I'm like, oh, come on, that makes things meaningless. So all you can really get a sense from this is like the magnitude of the jump that we saw. So again, the two humps, I guess, on your left, that's normal traffic for the week, and those two dips are the weekends, because of course people have like a decreased usage pattern on the internet on the weekends for certain things. And then all of a sudden you see that large magnitude spike. That's this new roll-in. What? Then I made a pretty one where I took the weekends out, so it's like cool mountains, I don't know. But anyway, so how does this data get made, right? So we are looking at the product of a collection of systems which are telling us about what our systems are seeing. So when you step back and you think, okay, these are the systems which are feeding me information. On the far right, we have the reality of the world, packets hitting machines. This is like the biggest truth of truths. Now, at this point, we then take that data as it hits a name server and we summarize it into a transaction. Right? A transaction takes like all the beauty out of the painting and summarizes it in a silly name with like the painter and all that nonsense. Then that piece of data, the transaction, gets summarized into a volume and put into graphite, and that graphite represents that in dashboards as a volume of something that's going on, into a rate. So you start to think about how it gets made and where things could go wrong. But really in the back of your mind, what you're thinking is, whoa, 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 cost. It's important. Because someone owes us money now, right? That mountain just went up huge. What's going on? So you start thinking about, who are the usual suspects? What customers could have explosions in traffic like this, right? Is it a social media company? Is it a CDN? Is it an infrastructure service company? Who knows? But you're sitting there the whole time and you're like, who can drive this much traffic? Complexity. Now in this case, the complexity isn't really complexity in the sense that it's a complex problem. It's complexity that's manifested by a whole bunch of assumptions being introduced to the system and a little bit of tech debt, just a pinch. So when we think about the system and we think about where the problems are most likely to occur, it's when you're taking like that beauty that is the real world and you're summarizing it into a transaction. This is what I thought at the time, just biased human. You know, you just trim things off and assume that you know everything and you can get to it. So we'll talk about some interesting dimensions that you lose there. This is just part of like the DNS wonkery, you know, to spread the love of the DNS. There's so many bits of interest in those packets that are being thrown away when you just summarize it as a single transaction. These are some of them. We'll go through a few more in a little minute. And you realize that the system that you've created is more like Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, and the sausage that you're eating in your dashboard is just the quality of the things that you're putting in the first place. So like if you let sawdust get in there, you're eating sawdust. If you let rats get in there, you're eating rats. Now I know we're all really awesome in this room, and the first thing that we would do is we'd just go out there and we'd look at a PCAP and we'd just solve this damn problem, right? Like, stupid machine, I don't care what number you tell me, I can go out there, I can look at the network, I can see what this is, it's big enough that if I take a sample, it's gonna be in the sample. But then, of course, the other problem having happened, you get worried if it's a problem or the problem. So you need to stop and check yourself, kind of try to control that complexity and bias thing. And this is one of those weird things that you need to like remind yourself to do as you're going through almost everything, because chances are if you don't stop and think about it consciously, you're just gonna fly through the autopilot solve model. All right, to talk about the problem, we're just gonna go for like a quick thing about the DNS, because I don't know how familiar people are with like the inner workings, and it's way cooler if you get the trick at the end. So essentially, when queries are resolved, a query comes in to a recursive resolver. The recursive resolver, assuming the record isn't in the cache, then goes out to root and says, hey root, and it solves back down from com to Twitter. Oh, who has the authoritative record for Twitter? Dyn has a record for Twitter. Okay, cool. Then that goes and it asks us, and then we give them back the IP address. Nice and easy. Now, as I mentioned, the cache, right? So the recursive resolver, in there is configured a time to live for that record. That's not like Pete living it up tonight at the bar. That's like how long that thing should sit in the cache before it asks where the new copy is. And there are these beautiful things called R codes. So if you have DNS monitoring and you aren't breaking things out by R codes, I mean, life is horrible. So like R codes are the way you figure out if there's rats in your sausage, right? If you treat all these as one thing and a query is a query is a query, then you deserve to eat rats, right? Like you're not segmenting these things out. And there's like, so of course, right there be dragons, R code 5 refused. Now, what happens, we're back, wrong way. So in this case, what was happening is there's like these CPE devices, right? Or like, like routers in your house. And the router is basically trying to figure out, hey, can I get to the internet? Can I get to the internet? Is there new things I need on the internet? Right, so it's constantly doing this. And it turns out that the record had been delegated to us. So if you went and said, hey, Com, where can I find this record? Oh, Dine knows where that record is. And then you come and ask us, we don't know where that record is. So like, I refuse to answer that. And the fun thing about our code 5 refused is there's no negative caching semantics. Haha! So when there's no negative caching semantics, like those exist for NX domains. So if you're looking for a subdomain of something, like chris.baker.com, and it's like, oh no, hey, sorry, remember that I told you it wasn't there for a little while, right? Like that'd be a nice thing to have. But in the case of an R code 5, nothing like that is implemented. Hint, hint, anybody who likes to write RFCs, that would be really great, especially for us, because that's a big problem. One of the signs that you can see this happening is when you look back at the time series of these queries coming in, they start to like trickle in, right? Like in jumps, as the recursive resolvers, TTLs, and the records they had expired, and they realized that nobody would then tell them where this answer was. Yeah, so I jumped ahead a little bit. This is where you break out the secret that NX domains have cool TTLs, and there's minimums, and all these other fun things. It's like semantics that exist in the protocol to protect you from this. And for people who aren't familiar with the DNS, it's like all the memcache being ripped out in front of your database servers and then just being exposed, right? Like that's scary. Why are they like, come on, it's scary. All the caching is gone. All right, so back to monitoring. So when this problem arises and it's your problem, you start to think of, okay, how could I have stopped this from happening? And you think like your genius scheme, and you're like, all right, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to axe for every TLD zone. I'm going to process those, and I'm going to find stuff that's delegated to us, and I'm going to reconcile that with a list of things that we have records for. And then you think about how big com zone is and how that's like really impossible. Well, not impossible like you couldn't do it, but like impossible that they don't think they'd let you do it. Right? Like that, I mean, for them, that's like a huge computational cost, like ripping all the contents of that out. So, what you can do is you monitor for R code 5s, and then you track those down. And you should be doing this anyway, right? Because R code 5s tell you a lot of interesting things about the internet. So R code 5s, they're big when you're getting like a DDoS rolling in, because people are throwing like legit UDP 53 traffic at you. But it's for things that you don't have. And again, without the caching semantics, that's going to come right in at you. So it's good to have that anyway. And then you'll notice some CDNs, because they don't want to trust like the crusty recursives. Well, all right, I don't want to insult recursives. But based on the implementation, not all of them respect TTLs, right? TTLs are a rule, people. We have rules for a reason. We have RFCs for a reason. But because we don't all follow the RFCs, people have to live. And one of the ways that CDNs live and they make sure they're giving the correct content is they query the authorities directly. It's a symptom of the system. Right, so you solve this. And you get to walk around the office and you're like, yeah, what's up? I got this. But you should have known in the first place, so come on, Dumbledore. So retroactive monitoring, it's basically the list of all the things that you should have done in the first place. So think about like a retrospective, but it's not a retrospective because it's not something that's public facing. It's like when you have to stare at yourself in the mirror and realize like how that incident went in like the deep, horrible, confrontational way you can with your coworkers. So I'm like a pretend ops guy. I mean, we have some of my real team members who like real ops guy work, or ops person work, and correcting myself. There's real ops people, and I deeply respect them. I'm more of a data person. So when these things go on and you find these things, you have to be really careful because, they have feelings, they're people, and you don't want to walk over and be like, hey, jerk, why isn't there any alerts going off for R code 5, huh? They're rolling in, people getting woken up. But you can't do that because that's not nice. And some problems are only complex because of our negligence, right? Like both of these problems are really simple. Like when you dig into them, like the first problem, I mean, God, if we had just paid attention to what we should have done in the first place and reconciled and just followed a straight procedure, a list of things we all know we should do in a fixed order, instead of running off like children to the candy store and just grabbing everything like Willy Wonka. Willy Wonka has a great point there. Look at that one kid isn't the one who survived. 1 out of 5 or 6. only one who listened. In this case, and we didn't listen, so it broke. Now, because I'm in Portland, I need to show this slide. This is important. It's a beard contest. It was held here a while ago. It's a great beard. All right, that's it, people. Thank you very much. Questions? Harsh criticisms? Okay.
There's one over there.
Oh, Pete.
Is it hard to carry the weight of being such a thought leader as yourself?
When I thought about it, Atlas shrugged. I'm from New Hampshire, come on.